So I was feeling today like there was a part of my journey that I wanted to share from while in it. And if you are a mental projector watching this, the reason that I wanted to record it from the energy that I'm in is because I feel like a lot of the time when we're in this space, which is extremely in our mind, I don't know about you guys, but I tend to feel like I need to hide from the world. There's been a lot of shame around moments when I've had it pointed out to me that I'm operating from a really mental space or from a feeling that I'm not fully in my body. And so rather than waiting to share until I feel embodied and I feel like I'm centered and grounded, I'm just going to share when I'm in this, because I feel like maybe that's not the time to teach, right, for the rest of the world. But for those of us who share this design, I want it to feel that I want to be a reminder to you that when you're in these spaces, it is such a natural and organic part of this journey. You are a mental projector. Our minds are both the greatest gift and sometimes feel like the biggest curse, right? What I've noticed is that a lot of times when I'm really in my mind, there's a story or a feeling around it that makes me feel inauthentic. Almost like the feeling of being an imposter. And maybe that comes from looking back at my life and seeing when I was trying to teach from this very mental space. This could be personal to me. And feeling like back then I didn't have an embodiment to match that. I was speaking from like all of this gathered knowledge, but none of it was actually being lived by me at the time. And so maybe that's where that story comes from in my personal journey. But now when I come into these moments, and a lot of times it comes after a big mutation where I feel like my physical body is so exhausted that it's like all I can do is just rest and just basically do nothing. But I'm finding my way through this. It's like I can tell that there's another layer to what I'm learning, that like even when I'm exhausted and moving through mutation, it doesn't mean I can't incorporate little things to bring me deeper and deeper into the body, because those are often the times where I find myself completely just lost in Maya, lost in the illusion, lost in thought for sometimes days on end, just analyzing. I have my ajna in my throat defined, and so when I'm just laying there exhausted, it's like that physical energy, sometimes with the emotion of melancholy, I'm seeing, life and my perception of what is experienced in my reality through that melancholy and through that exhaustion. And maybe you guys have a similarity with this, that when we're seeing through that energy, oftentimes we're seeing through stories of laziness, inadequacy, imposter syndrome, not doing enough, all these kind of conditioned responses that, especially as mental projectors, we may have really deeply inside of us. So what I've learned from this process is to find your rhythm, right? We're constantly mutating, we're always mutating, and some mutations hit us harder than others. And when they do, knowing how you move through mutation is really, really helpful. Because once you can kind of zoom out and see your pattern of mutation, you can combat the parts of it that sometimes maybe pull you back a little bit. I like to call this turning ourselves off to life, is the way that I see kind of taking like a couple steps back, is if when we're in this energy of exhaustion and just needing to rest, if we're using that energy to beat ourselves up and to analyze life and to tell ourselves we're not doing enough, or to feel like everyone else is doing better, to compare, whatever the conditioning is, those are ways in which we turn ourselves off to receiving the fullness of life. And a mutation is really just a little like, it's like when you pull a rubber band, it's like you have to expand, and then sometimes there's a subtle contraction, right? Because things are being released. When we mutate, we're expanding, we're feeling all this new potentiality, all this new worth, all this new love, and then how big the contraction is depends on how much we allow ourselves to be with the sensation in our bodies without telling ourselves a story that something's wrong. So we're pulling that rubber band, and then how much we can actually hold that expansion depends on our nervous system and our awareness. So sometimes we might pull the rubber band really far. Let's say you had an ayahuasca trip. It's kind of like all of life can be compared to this. So you have some really big activation, and you see, you understand, right? You understand through your experience who you are as source. And then after that experience, what happens is that our nervous system, and that in conjunction with our psychological makeup, from the way that we've been brought up, our cultural and societal conditioning, we each have this very specific set point in our nervous system of how much sensation we're willing to hold and to feel safe with. This has a lot to do with somatics, and I'm by no means trained in this. This is all just from my personal mutation experience lately. So we have all built this set point, and the way that I've learned this is that it's referred to as a havingness level. And I learned this from the book Existential Kink, which is an amazing book on shadow integration if you haven't read it already. So we each have this havingness level, this capacity to hold sensation and essentially our self-worth. Or you could even say it's the ability for our nervous system and our body vehicle to hold more and more of our spirit. And spirit is sensational when it comes in, right? It's truth, it's life force, it's energy. It's just raw energy. So when we go through a mutation, we expand and we feel that bigness. We're bringing it into the body. And then after that experience, whatever it is, there's this point where our ego utilizes everything in the past to try to bring us back to that set point, usually at a lower place than what we've expanded into, right? So it's trying to bring us back to that set point to keep us safe, because that's where it knows we're safe. It's where all our stories live. It's where our foundational beliefs live. It's where our limiting beliefs live. But it's the comfort zone. And so we have this past log of information in our subconscious mind that says, oh, well, we've been safe there. So the ego, from years and years and years of us living our lives, has gathered all of this information from what we've focused on and what we've given importance to, of how exactly we can turn ourselves off. Meaning how we can bring ourselves, because when we turn ourselves off, we bring ourselves back down to that lower set point. If we were to keep ourselves turned on to life, when you're turned on, you're open, you're expansive, you're ready to be the chalice to receive that spirit in the body. But our ego and our mind work with our emotions to try to bring us back to safety. And this isn't wrong. This isn't wrong. It's just a survival mechanism. But when we can become aware of that, we can work with that mechanism to expand, to be able to hold that new sensation. And so when we go through the mutation, we might expand and only contract a little bit, or maybe not at all. So I've just been playing with this lately and noticing. I've actually been writing up almost like an equation for this, or a blueprint, because I would love to be able to help work with people one-on-one at some point with this. Because every single person has a specific and very personalized equation to the way in which they turn themselves off. It's totally different person to person. So for me, I know I've been tracking, and I see exactly the way my thoughts and stories and emotions interact to pull me back down. And mine are something like, usually it's always having to do with self-sabotage, but it usually starts with subtleties, and then you'll start to gain momentum and start to spiral, and you'll feel that vortex of what the fuck, I felt all my power, and then now I'm starting to feel so like out of touch with that, what happened. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's just a part of us trying to keep us safe. So for me, my mind likes to do a lot of stuff with self-worth. It'll start to analyze everything that I'm doing and be like, are you sure that was the right way? Because this person might see it like this, and this person might see that as like this. And it's always showing me a perspective of being wrong in somebody else's eyes. And it will show me that from all these different perspectives. And it will also come with a feeling of needing to figure out what I'm here to do in the world, and then analyzing that to the point of overwhelm, where my nervous system is so anxious, so overloaded with sensation that I just want to end up eating, because I'm like in my head and I'm confused and I'm like seeking pleasure, I'm seeking numbing, I'm seeking all of that because I'm trying to avoid that feeling. So once I became really, really aware of the way in which I go through mutations and how my mind and emotions want to bring me back down, when those stories and everything come back up, now I have that awareness, and so I can remind myself. I can be like, okay, what's actually going to be supportive? First thing I do is I zoom out, and sometimes I'll journal from this space of speaking to my higher self and be like, hey, can you just tell me what's actually happening here? Not the story in my head, but what's actually happening here. So this morning I did this, and my higher self was like, yeah, you just went through a really big expansion. Don't downplay this. You're going to feel tired. You're going to want rest. Let that be okay. Let it be okay. Whatever you are desiring, whatever your body is, not just like a craving, but like what is your body genuinely desiring? Usually it is like true nourishment after a mutation. It's like, how can you treat your vessel with the highest level of love so that it can house that new energy with the most ease? So the mind might say like, ooh, alcohol, drugs, whatever, like shitty food, those kind of things that may have symbolized comfort in the past or numbing. So this is where awareness comes in of like, what is my body really, really desiring right now, so that I can hold this energy and I can stay turned on? What are the things that turn your soul and your body on and continue? If it's a true turn on, it's going to be sustainable. It's going to be longer term. It's adding to your long-term fulfillment. If it's something that's a short-term satisfaction, like a dopamine spike, chances are that's probably not the nourishment. And it can't be, not across the board, because sometimes, that little, piece of chocolate or whatever is something that your soul is asking for. But you gotta be, that's where only we can be, our inner compass. But it takes a lot of honesty. So for me today, that was a deep, deep rest. And then watching my mind as it went through all the cycles of what I should be doing, all the things that I should have energy for, should, and speaking truth to that, right? So as a mental projector, if you're watching this, it's really important for you to take each thought that causes any kind of contraction in the body, any belief that you've had, and hold that thought in your mind and ask it, is this true? Right? Because we only have a belief because we've assumed that it's true. So the second that you shine light on that belief and you realize that it's not true, it begins to dissolve. You begin to let go of that perspective and that lens on your world. So this is a great time if your mind is overactive and you're trying to rest. If your mind's trying to process, at least take your thoughts. This is called thought captivity. I just learned this recently. Well, I just learned that term for it. And you can use the work from Byron Katie. That's an amazing template to use for those 4 questions to unravel any false beliefs during that time. So that way, anything that's trying to turn you off, you immediately disengage that mechanism. And then reminding yourself again and again with just like this gentleness, like, hey, I'm going through mutation. I know that my mind's going to do this thing. Another great way to look at it is laughter. Like if you can laugh at those things that are coming up and be like, that's the turnoff. That's what's trying to happen here. I see that my mind is just trying to keep me safe. I'm going to speak truth to my ego. Hey, ego, thanks for doing what you're doing. I'm actually fine. I'm actually mutating so that I can hold a new level of worth. And that level of worth isn't something I've lived from before, so you don't have a record so that you can know that it's safe to expand. But it is. And I'm going to hold myself and let myself know that I'm safe to hold this new sensation. And the rest of it is just somatics. It's being with the actual experience of your body. We're so, especially as mental projectors, I don't know about you, but we're so used to living up here, probably most of our lives, because we have incredible minds, and we've probably learned to live in our own little fantasy world up here. Whether it's your analytical process, your thought process, both of them, whatever, you probably have lived a good majority of your life in your mind. So during this time, whatever you can do to come into the body, even if it's laying there and breathing and feeling the sensations in your body and just being with it and seeing if you can take away the story that's overlapped on top of that sensation, and if you can just feel the raw energy in your body and trust that the more that you can be with, is the more you are integrating into that expanded level. That's what staying turned on means, is it means staying open and receiving to the sensation of your spirit that's coming into the body. So actually the best thing you could probably do during a mutation is total rest, total silence, and being with sensation. Or if there's another equation to that, whatever you can do to give the energy to that which is coming in. Because so often we want to distract ourselves or do other things, but then are we really holding, are we really becoming the chalice to hold that? Notice what your body does with intense sensation. Next time you feel a big contraction or an expansion, notice what your body does and what your mind does with that sensation, and see what happens if you can just go into it and rest in the very middle of that sensation until it dissipates. And that takes taking the story off. So I wanted to share that today because that has been a huge part of my journey the last couple weeks, is like big mutations and then a lot of like after effect. And sometimes we are so conditioned by society to just go and like on to the next that we forget, or we don't even realize that we are in a process, right? We're in a season, like whether it's a day or a week or a month season of this mutation. The more space that we can create in our lives to hold that, the more expansive we can be to more of our spirit and form. The more worth that we can move through life with and then have reflected back to us in the external. But we can't have that reflected to us in the external if we don't even know how to hold it in our body. The last thing I wanted to touch on, and I might even do a separate video on this, is what happens for mental projectors when we are deconditioning, when we are truly deconditioning. And you'll know if you are truly deconditioning, because you'll start to feel like probably a lot of identity crisis of like, who even was I? Like stripping off these layers of what you were pretending to be and being like, I don't even know. I have no idea like who I am, what this life is. And there's so many layers and subtleties to this experience, but the deeper and deeper you go, what I've found to be both a blessing and a curse, and it's definitely a blessing the more and more you become aware of it, is that as we strip away conditioning, all that openness in your chart is a gift. So it's been filled with things that are not us, conditioning patterns, stagnancy. And the more we decondition, it's like we're myofascia releasing those centers of the body. Hopefully you are myofascia releasing your body as well. Then what you start to notice is that there's really like no edge between you and your environment. And that can be pretty trippy. It can be pretty trippy as it's happening. It's like you start to ask like, what actually is inside and outside? You start to realize that you literally are your environment. And so the way I've been feeling this is like intensity, extreme sensitivity to everything, and being kind of like mind blown a little bit at just how much our bodies are meant to pick up on. And this is where it becomes a gift, the more sensation you're able to hold. Because if you're not able to hold that sensation, what happens is that you contract, and there's a story on it that creates that contraction, and it's as if you're saying no to a feeling that's trying to just pass through. And when we say no, when we resist something, it actually like creates a contraction in the body, which is what creates sickness, disease, inauthenticity, whatever it is, trauma patterns. So all those little places are like stagnancies inside of us. But the more that we release those through myofascial release, through inquiry, through thought captivity, we're opening space. And so that we become this like open vessel, and essentially like a mirror. We become like a mirror. We almost are like a reflector, but a little bit different. But we have all this open space in which we are reflecting the other. We are mirroring the other. We are mirroring our environment. So things like going into a space and feeling a certain place in your body start to hurt. None of that is coincidence. None of that is, once you start to decondition, you start to realize almost nothing is actually you. It's something that's passing through. And if you can go into this sensation without a lot of stories around what it means and how it relates to my past, if you can go into the raw sensation of that, there is so much wisdom that you hold for others. right? If you can do that from an objective place where you're not like, oh, I feel a stomach ache and it means this about this, and then it relates to this thing that happened in my past, and then there's now all of a sudden a contraction, and now I'm like trying to act from that. That doesn't help anybody. But if you're able to be that open vessel and you feel something and you're like, huh, and you get curious about that, and then maybe you speak to that with somebody, you're like, hey, are you open to a little experiment? Like, I'm feeling something in my body and I'm wondering if we can have a discussion about it. And then you open up the opportunity to receive an invitation, right? Because you don't want to be sharing that if somebody doesn't want to hear it. But those sensations are wisdom in which we get to navigate life with. And so this is something that I am just now beginning to really tap into, because before I had so much stagnancy, so much clogged in my system, that there was so much contraction around sensations coming in. There was so much cloudiness in my mirror of things that I needed to speak truth to and release myself. So I couldn't really sense what was coming in, where it was coming from, if it was mine or others, because I still had this identity around so much. But when you start to realize that you don't actually have much of an identity in the way a lot of other designs do, you start to realize that you're really here to guide others with this wisdom. But the funny thing is, when you try to guide others before you've deconditioned a lot of this yourself, it's kind of like murky. Because I was trying to do this, but it didn't always seem to work very well. Or I would be doing it from trying to prove something, or I'd be doing it without an invitation. Lately, I'm trying to not really guide until I've kind of moved through all of this. Unless somebody asks me personally or whatever, I've kind of taken a step back from that, because I've realized until I can be more of a clear space to really feel what's objective and what's mine and what's others, I don't really have any business guiding anybody else. And we're so quick to see our design and try to create an identity around it. And I've been doing this for years. Like, oh, I'm here to be this leader of the leaders, or I'm here to influence people in this way. And when we are trying to fit a role, we're doing something that feels inauthentic. Because when we are truly being the leaders, it's probably the moments, this has been reflected to me, it's in the moments that we're not trying. So lately it's like, whenever I notice myself trying to fit that role, I'm like, okay, take a step back. And I've learned, just like, for right now, I'm just going to share my journey with other mental projectors, and maybe they can resonate with what I'm going through and the experiences that I'm having. Because I'm sure that there are many of us out there who feel a little different, and everybody has their uniqueness to their chart. And I know, like, when I first realized that I was a mental projector, I tried to search other mental projector stuff, and there's not a lot of good information out there. So I'm hoping that in bringing through more of my experience, rather than trying to teach it, because I'm not a human design reader, I know quite a bit, but I'm by no means a reader or have that kind of expert knowledge. But I do feel like, from my experience personally, I'm receiving a lot of understanding around what this design actually is meant to be in the world. So I hope that through sharing, I can find, others who are resonating with similar experiences, or maybe I have some sort of key that helps you on your journey, and maybe you have some for me too. So feel free to comment below if any of this resonated, or if you have anything you want to share that's been working for you, or if you have questions, I would also love to answer. But I've been desiring more of a community of people with this design so that we can share, because there's so many keys and it's such a beautiful design. And if you're not in a place where you feel that love for it yet, just be patient. I didn't feel that either, and now I'm falling so in love with it. In fact, somebody asked me the other day if I could have any other design or my own, what would I choose? And I said my own. Like, I'm falling so in love with mine. And I know that Ra said that, where, like, when we start to decondition, there is nothing else that we would want besides our own blueprint. So if you are not in that space yet, be patient and trust that you did choose this, that you chose this blueprint, that we chose all of this life experience, even the things that feel victimizing or challenging. Those two are a part of this process, and I bet you anything that those will be the things that turn into the greatest gifts for you later on. So if you're going through a mutation, be patient with yourself, be gentle with yourself, give yourself the most nourishing deep, compassionate love, and just create a nice space for yourself to go through that, because it can be intense, especially when you're starting to feel everything around you. Remind your mind of that. Remind your mind of what's actually happening here, the truth, and the truth of your body. All right, talk to you guys soon.